السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأصلي وأسلم على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. أما بعد. If you remember, in the beginning we had said that the discussion of legal philosophy is about answering some important questions. And from these questions was the debate about legal authority or legal validity. We have explained that Islamic legal tradition or Islamic law is not a code of law implemented by the state, as is accepted in the Western legal tradition, but rather it is a system vibrant in the societal conscience, protected by the class of ulama, who are not, again, like the judges and the lawyers in the Western tradition. They are not experts in the Western sense, but rather they are the people who implement this law in their own lives, first and foremost, and they stand for the preservation of this tradition. And legal validity is in conforming with this legal tradition for individuals, the society, and even the state. So the rulers in Islam, in order to validate themselves, had to come in harmony with the Sharia. It was not the other way around, like in the Western tradition, where the state implements the law, and law is only about different codes which are implemented in the society in a very cosmetic manner. So moving this discussion further, in today's session we will talk about modernization of Islamic legal tradition. The project of modernization, which was the extension of colonialism, was about destroying this diversity and plurality in Islamic legal tradition and turning it into a code eventually implemented by the state, or which serves state interests. And as I have pointed to in the previous sessions also, this influenced the Muslim movements in the modern age. This was a mistake to consider that the return of the Sharia is its implementation in the Western sense. Sharia is a code of law which will be implemented by the state. So in the modernization of Islamic legal tradition, which happened in 18th, 19th, from the 17th century, in the colonialism of the Muslim world, particularly by the European powers, they trampled under their feet the anthropological past of the Sharia. The Sharia was vibrant in the society, maintaining its diversity, schools of thought, and the legal norms and social morality were largely inseparable, as we have discussed. Islamic law, Sharia, was maintaining justice in the society and it had everything to do with the private life of the individual, because it stood for social morality also, and these principles were missing in the Western system. So the modernization of Islamic legal tradition was destroying this anthropological past by and transforming it into an untexted Sharia, a Sharia which is reduced to a code of law, and eventually to the private sphere, which we know as personal law, destroying the vibrance of the Sharia and its permanence. Because, as I have said, the Islamic legal tradition is completely opposite to the Western legal system in these basic principles. So in the Islamic Sharia, the intersection of the legal with the communal, with the society, was a marker of the law's populism and communitarianism. So it was vibrant in the community. It could never be separated from the community. So the law, Islamic law, was an interpretive and heuristic project, not a body of rules of action or conduct prescribed by a controlling authority. And as I have said, the Western legal tradition, as eventually the dominant philosophy which was accepted in the Western legal tradition, emphasized on not indulging in any interference with the private life of the individuals, even in the criminal law. So any action which does not harm the society materially or does not go against the concerns of the state has nothing to do with the legal sphere. This is a private affair of the individual. So basically, legal norms were separated from social morality in the Western tradition. And this is not the case in Islamic legal tradition. So Sharia law was not an abstraction, nor did it apply equally to all, for individuals were not seen as indistinguishable members of a generic species, standing in perfect parity before a blind lady of justice. We know the blind lady of justice depicts the legal system of the West, which is adopted by the East also. So Sharia law is unique in these basic principles. Each individual and circumstance was deemed unique, requiring ijtihad that was context specific. So basically, in these lessons, our main purpose was to understand, highlight, emphasize the uniqueness of the Sharia. Islamic law is not a code which will be implemented by the state and that's it. Islamic law is unique in many things. So we should not be influenced, and this happens, the dominant civilization influences even how we think about our religion, how we aspire to implement our religion. So the main uniqueness, we can say, the main uniqueness of the Sharia law was that each individual and circumstance was deemed unique. Each individual and circumstance, legal circumstance, legal matter, circumstance was deemed unique, was deemed unique, requiring ijtihad that was context specific. So it was not an abstraction or a code which should be applied on all. For this reason, I have been highlighting the importance of human condition, understanding the human conditions in Islamic law, because every human being is unique. Every human condition is different. Even one individual in his different matters is unique. There is change from one situation to another, one circumstance to another, one condition to another, which requires unique ijtihad. So basically, if we want to describe the practice of law in the modern era, or the Western conception of law as it became, I'm not saying that there are no Western legal philosophers who did not criticize this idea of abstraction of law, implementation by the state. There are. However, this became the dominant ideology. So if we want to describe in one line, we can say that to practice law in the modern era, to practice law in the modern era, or in the modern way or method, is to be an agent of the state. That's it. Is to be an agent of the state. So state will define the implementation of the law in all areas, and the state institutions, which are eventually run by human beings, they will see their interests, and the state will only interfere in areas which are public, or neglecting which can lead to public harm, and so on and so forth. So morality has nothing to do with law. So coming back to the question of legal authority, as I said, the answer to this question in Islamic legal tradition is unique. In Islam, law takes its authority directly from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and permeates in a vibrant manner, engages with the society, transforming its morality as well as discipline, and is safeguarded by the class of ulama, who are not experts in the Western sense, like the judges and the lawyers. And you may have a judge who is an expert of law, and he has great tajriba, experience in this field, but the law for which he stands does not emanate from his behavior, or he does not practice it in his life, or it is irrelevant to his personal life. You will not see this in ulama. The sharia for which they stand, from the basic conditions of a mufti or a mujtahid, is that he should be practicing the sharia in his private life also. That's why I said the alim, the faqih, the expert of law, mufti, mujtahid, is not an expert in the Western sense or in the Western meaning of this word. However, legal authority was understood in a different manner in the West. Now, coming to the topic, modernization of Islamic legal tradition. Modernization of Islamic legal tradition under European, particularly French influence, happened in many ways, but the most prominent is changing Sharia with its vibrance, diversity, plurality, into a code of law. So the first westernized commercial code was promulgated in 1850. And this is when the colonized areas of the Muslim world were beginning to achieve their freedom. But the West made sure that after they leave, they still keep their ideologies and traditions vibrant in the previous colonies. So if you study the legal history of these countries, Algeria, Egypt, subcontinent, India, and other countries which were colonized by the British, French, so on and so forth, you will see how when they were leaving, they played with the institutions. And we can see this influence even till now. The legal system which is being followed in these countries is primarily Western. And the movements which started in the late 20th century or 19th century calling for the Sharia, they were also influenced by this idea of the Sharia, which is a code, and it needs implementation of the state. So the marginalization of the Sharia was thus itself an act not only of dismantling. See, it was not only dismantling Sharia, destroying the Sharia. Muslims should not follow the Sharia. It was not an act only of dismantling, but also of building a system of codes and law that functioned to serve the state. So after achieving the freedom, they made sure that these Muslim countries, they run on democratic setups, and the ideologies, philosophies, systems which are followed should be Western, so that they don't pose a threat to us, threat to the domination they have in the world. So it was not only about dismantling Sharia, a plan and a plot to dismantle the Sharia in the Muslim world. It was constructing and building systems, legal systems, courts, law, codes, in a manner in which, in a very tricky way, in which the Sharia is alienated slowly and gradually. And if they would have come with their Western codes directly, leave the Sharia and implement this, leave the Quran and implement this, Muslims would not accept it. Muslims would not digest this idea easily. They came from a back door, changing the Sharia itself. And this is the modernization of the Sharia project. So as I have emphasized many times, one of the hallmarks of the Sharia is its plurality of opinion. Unifying and homogenizing the law is one of the primary concerns of the modern state. One law, which we call legal abstraction. And for this project, achieving this one unifying system, they adopted particular strategies. One of the main strategy was, we can call it codifying transmutation. We can call it the strategies which they adopted was codifying transmutation. It was not a khidmah, a service to the Islamic law to codify it in a modern manner. It was rather a transmutation, depriving the Sharia of its vibrance. And so this codifying project, you will see this in all these countries, in all places where they the places which they colonized. changing the Sharia into particular codes. And in this, one of the main tools of colonialism which was adopted is Orientalism. I will come to that. They took the service of some particular Orientalists, scholars, who translated or we can say transmutated some particular texts of Islamic law, turning them into codes, okay, and in this way paving the path to the modernization of Islamic legal tradition. Another strategy which they adopted was nationalism. Nationalism. Because they could never achieve this unifying and homogenizing project without this idea of nationalism, which has always been a masculine conception. So nationalism has always been a masculine conception subordinating the feminine. One of the most salient features of the nation state is its totalistic appropriation of the domain of law. I mentioned this before many times. An appropriation that presupposed centralization and bureaucratization of the legal system. So everything should be in the control of the state. And they did this with the economic resources, leaving nothing in the hands of the private owners. And for this, or one of the manifestations of this centralization, bureaucratization, which is one of the main features of the modern nation state, or authoritarianism, or we may call it totalistic appropriation. One of the main manifestations of this was attack on the waqf system, because waqf was a private affair. And it is very astonishing to see, if you study the legal history of this period, you will see most of the awqaf, private endowments, were in the hands of Muslim women. So this project was basically a masculine project. For this reason, you will see later the emergence of the feminist movements against this idea. And we're talking about the legal system in particular. The feminist movements against this idea in the legal rights. So they demanded their legal rights. They called for the reform in the legal system, which is primarily masculine. So we have these movements and ideas of cultural feminism and other important movements which called for a reform in the system. So one of the main manifestations was attack on the waqf system, and they took the service of Orientalists in that. That's why we as Muslims, we have to be awake. We are living in a reality which is very complex. We should not act as weak-minded people. We have to be awake, understanding the plots and tricks of the enemies. So for example, what they did was they compiled literature against the waqf system, emphasizing the importance of the inheritance law in Islam. And they took the service of Orientalists. They compiled books emphasizing on explaining the inheritance system in Quran and Sunnah. This is a bid'ah waqf because it is privately owned properties, particularly women. And in this, the inheritance law eventually gets abused, and we should stand for bringing back the inheritance law based on Quran and Sunnah against this innovation and bid'ah of waqf, which abuses the inheritance law. So they prepared the minds of the Muslims. So their concern was not Sunnah and bid'ah. Their concern was not the importance of the inheritance law in Islam or the Muslim societies. Their main concern was this totalitarian project of centralization, because this is uh, privately owned properties, waqf endowments, or all economic resources should come directly and under the central command of the state. This was their project. So as I said, nationalism was used as a strategy to modernize the Islamic legal tradition. Why? Because a strong colonialist regime and later nationalist governance, because this freedom was not achieved completely. We are still not free, and you can see in the Muslim world the changes which are happening and the aspirations of the Muslims. So when these colonialists left the Muslim world, we did not achieve complete freedom. These colonialist regimes were turned into nationalist governances. A strong colonialist regime thus required the code, the statute, and the act as tools of total control. So leaving this vibrant Sharia and any form of system which cannot be controlled by the state, it is diverse, it is vibrant in the society, any form of privately owned properties, economic system which is not directly in the control of the state was attacked and dismantled. So in the words of a Western legal philosopher, he says, if blood and sperm were seen to constitute the nation, because nation was, this idea of nationalism was always masculine. Remember this. Because nation based on the racialist identity of a particular people, where does it come from? It comes from the male. Male has the ability to produce this nation. That's why it was always a masculine idea. If he says, if blood and sperm were seen to constitute the nation, so was the state's law. State's law was also based on this idea of nationalism. So the hallmark of this codifying transmutation, turning Sharia into codes, was the appropriation of the law by the nation state. Appropriation of the law by the nation state, and one of the main manifestations of it was subordination of woman under the banner of modernity, which eventually led to the feminist movements. So we must understand all these movements which sometimes in ignorance and enthusiasm we want to import to our lands because of ignorance and not understanding that these movements were these movements were produced, or they existed, or we can say these movements were an answer to the problems of their society. In the West, we may not have the same problems. Every civilization has its problems. We must seek the answers to it. But importing it to our lands, to our society, to our civilization with different problems is completely absurd. Okay, so these were the strategies adopted in modernization of this project of modernization of Islamic legal tradition. Another important philosophy which was promoted, you can also call it strategy, was which we can call exclusive individualism. Exclusive individualism. Exclusive individualism. This philosophy of individualism is from the foundations of Western modernity and post-modernity, it was promoted in the legal sphere also, against the community. As I said, Islamic law, it existed within the community in a vibrant manner. So destroying it, these philosophies were promoted. Exclusive individualism. An increased sense of individualism combined with a male-oriented national state, a new male-oriented economy and bureaucracy, and a wholesale collapse of the domestic economies that had been the exclusive domain of women in particular, all combined to produce legal codes and legal cultures that, under the banner of modernity, tended to subordinate women rather than liberate them. And as I said, one of the main manifestations was destroying the Waqf system or attacking the Waqf system. So this is a problem. Transitional problematics of modernizing societies where traditional communal norms coexist alongside. So societies in which traditional communal norms coexist alongside ideologies, customs. Here we are talking about law, which is Sharia in Islam. It existed within the community conscience. So now this community conscience was destroyed and individualism was promoted. And this is also another strategy which was adopted. And one of the, as I said, from the manifestations of this promotion of exclusive individualism was legislation. These are examples to understand. Legislation against polygamy in the Muslim world. And this is how they started destroying. So it began with modernizing Islamic law and Muslims. Many Muslim thinkers and ulama were also influenced by this fitna. It was a great fitna. They thought, oh, we will come at par with the modern world while maintaining our traditional values and systems. But this was a trap. And eventually we saw how these particular areas which gave strength to our communities were attacked and destroyed. So legislation against polygamy in the Muslim world was one of the manifestations. I have all the legislations which were passed, where they passed. We have this. I will not go into that. In these particular countries, Algeria, Egypt, subcontinent, and other places, the Malay world, where the colonists ruled and colonialism was promoted. So legislation against polygamy, reforming divorce law, mother's right to child custody, inheritance. So all these areas were appropriated. Some were used and some were clearly discarded and attacked. So for example, the inheritance law was used. Books were prepared and written on the importance of inheritance law based on Quran and Sunnah against the Waqf system. Okay, so the modern nation state, which also was fundamentally engaged in and intertwined with the new forms of capitalism and new economic modes of production, had a profound interest in refashioning the modern family into a family that is distinctly nuclear. Now this is another important point here, attacking the family system. So of course these are big principles of the Western modernity and then post-modernity. However, we are focusing more on the change and modernization, destruction which happened in the legal sphere, in the legal tradition. So these are all main manifestations of exclusive individualism, attacking the family. Now, this is a big debate between Muslim thinkers about between the extended family and the nuclear family. Nuclear family means the head of the family and then his children, wife, and that's it. Sometimes even parents. Extended family is where we include the uncles and both paternal and maternal and their children. They live together. So According to my little research, I came to the conclusion that the family system which is promoted by Islam is extended family, not nuclear family. But there is a debate in this. So uh, even the architecture of the Muslim homes bears witness to this idea. So traditionally, our architecture would be uh, a massive house with the courtyard where all family members would meet, and they would live in separate quarters, rooms we can call them, but they were connected. It was extended family. There was no generation gap, no psychological problems. Of course, it would come at the cost of privacy sometimes, sacrifice, that's it. That is there. And we know this dunya is darul ibtila, it is a place of test. But at the same time, the benefits were great. No generation gap, psychological welfare, uh, the, the, the education, the legacy, the transfer of legacy from the previous generation to the new generation, all these benefits were there. So the West attacked the family system also, and the legislation which was done and fixed was clearly based on this idea of exclusive individualism. And these are manifestations. But the prime target of this attack was Waqf, in modernizing project initiated by both the colonialist powers and the native nationalist elites. The native nationalist elites and sometimes the despotic rulers, they were all serving the Western interests. Okay, so thus Waqf, the idea of endowment, Waqf, the main property of civil society in Islamic civilization for over a millennium, and the chief instrument of its social welfare and safety net. These are the great benefits of Waqf. I will repeat this. Waqf, the main principle or property of civil society in Islamic civilization for over a millennium, and a chief instrument of its sound welfare and safety net, became synonymous with civilizational retardation and regress. This is old economic method. It leads to regress. So we should modernize ourselves economically. And for that, we have to destroy the Waqf. So Waqf was the prime target of the West. We can say it is one of the main manifestations of this modernization project. After that, we have another important point here, which is relevant and connected with this project of modernization, was the concept of rights. The concept of rights. The concept of rights. To discuss this, we can frame another question from the main questions of legal philosophy generally. Or we can also include this in the question we are discussing: legal authority, legal validity. So if we separate this question, we can say this is a matter of the reach of law. The reach of law. How does law influence those who follow that law? Or we can include the reach of law in the same question, the question of authority and validity of law. So this is also a very perplexing situation in the Western legal tradition, the concept of rights. If you study any Western book about legal philosophy, you will understand what I'm saying. For this reason, some Western scholars, legal philosophers have acknowledged that in contemporary legal theory, the relation between the idea of law and the meaning of its authority is still very unclear, particularly the concept of rights. Some have even uh, rejected the existence of rights itself. In the terminology of one legal philosopher, he says, do rights really exist, or are they phantoms? Because rights as individuals involves morality. So if law is only about implementation of the state, what is the meaning of rights? If human beings have rights, what is the source of those rights? Where does these rights, the idea of rights, come from? If I have a right over another individual, over the state or the institution, where does it come from? Who gave me this moral power? And the Western legal philosophy, in the dominant form, does not believe in morality. That's why it is very complex. So do rights have moral power? Are they natural rights or moral rights? If I deserve a right, is it by nature or as a moral human being? So these questions were discussed in the concept of rights. Are legal rights universal or context based, person to person, state to state? So some legal philosophers, they said, well, rights don't exist. These are only interests of the state. The state gives you a particular right because it brings benefit to the state or the society. A state declares a particular action crime because it is destructive for the society. Eventually, it hurts the interests of the state. So it means the concept of rights is also not an objective concept. So according to some legal philosophers, a law transforms an interest into a protected interest, which is all a legal right is. So basically, right, haqq, hukuk. In Islam, it is completely a different thing. Haqq is intrinsic. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given me this particular haqq which I can demand from my parents, from the authority, from the state, each other. Hukuk. And morality is directly involved. And I will be asked about the hukuk on the last day. This is the reason, and I have said this many times, that without the concept of God, everything becomes meaningless. Anthropology, legal philosophy, metaphysics, all areas of human knowledge, they lose meaning. Or you can say they become too complex to solve. And the concept of rights is one example. So basically, according to some philosophers, they say the right does not exist. It is an interest which has been transformed into a protected interest. So let's say protected interest. All interests will not be protected. Anything which is beneficial to a particular human being will not be protected by law. Why? Because it does not concern the state. It does not benefit the state. Okay. So eventually, the Western legal tradition, it displaced the morality from the law and from the area of rights also. So we have this famous Wolfenden committee stating that it is not, in our view, the function of the law to intervene in the private lives of the citizens or to seek to enforce any particular pattern of behavior. For everyone of sufficiently mature years and sound mind, their own private behavior, no matter how dangerous or self-destructive, is their own business. This was the famous committee which gave this reasoning. Okay, so the function of the law, securing the rights, should only be in a domain which concerns the society or the state. Private affairs is completely different. Law has nothing to do, state has nothing to do with that. And this was applied in the criminal law also. Any personal and private behavior, how dangerous it is, how self-destructive it is not a crime, as long as it does not harm the society. And this harm was also defined. That's why I said it becomes very complex when you don't have a clear source of your ideology. God is not there. Human beings are not authoritarian in that sense, as was the church in the West. It becomes a complex affair. And eventually we realize that, as has been emphasized in Islam, if you don't become a slave of God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you eventually become slave of human beings. Freedom is never achieved. So when we have God missing from the picture, it is particular human beings who are at the helm of the affairs, at the top, running the state, defining these matters. Okay, so and this idea, which was promoted by the Wolf-Ferdinand Committee, was criticized also. We have good minds in the West. We have critiques of modernity, post-modernity. We have sane people also. But I'm talking about the dominant ideologies which have taken over the West. So society is entitled to pass judgment on any of the activities, public or private. And this was one of the critiques coming back to the society against the exclusive individualism. So we have, for example, legal philosophers like Patrick Delvin, who, in critique of this idea, they said society is entitled to pass judgment. Again, this was further criticized because this is all subjective. Society is entitled to pass judgment on any of the activities, public or private. A society is, by definition, a community of political and moral ideas. Society does not mean only a bunch of people, physical existence of human beings. Society is human beings who hold to a particular political and moral ideology. Now, this was also criticized. What if the society is all corrupt? What if all people in that society are corrupt? Who will define, majority or minority? What if minority is better than majority? Problem. So he defined society. He said society means a community of ideas. Without shared ideas on politics, morals and ethics, no society can exist. We can take the concept of ummah here. Understand this concept. Because ummah also, as I have mentioned many times in different sessions, ummah does not mean physical existence of people, physical existence of Muslims. As long as this physical existence and these human beings, they don't adhere to a particular unified ideology, we don't call it ummah in the Quranic sense. Okay, so we have philosophers who criticized this exclusive individualism in legal affair, like James Stephen, for example. He says judges should take into account not only the degree of harm or damage, but also the seriousness of the crime and its perpetrator, seriousness of the crime itself. So this odiousness is intrinsic to the crime itself. Now, so in conclusion, we can say problems relating to authority, rights and liberty arise from differing interpretations of the proper reach and limits of the law in the modern world. Laws that are claimed to embody universal rights. Again, this concept of universal rights. Now, rights, whose rights? Who is the defining force behind these rights? When you say universal rights, Do you mean if a society claims slavery as legal, or a particular behavior which is not considered good in the modern world, will we acknowledge their right because they are claiming it? So when we say universal rights, who will declare these universal rights? And of course, the critiques of this idea, they have clearly and aptly pointed out to the Eurocentric ideology prevailing behind these concepts, particularly of universal rights. Basically, universal rights means according to the European standard. This is not universal. Laws that are claimed to embody universal rights derived solely from reason. Whose reason? And this idea is ahistorical, are precisely the kind of alien rights that can only be imposed by force. So basically, it comes back to the authoritarianism, state, implementation. So these are some discussions and manifestations behind the modernization of Islamic legal tradition. So we should understand that Islamic legal system is not a code or a statute system which requires implementation of the state only, but rather it is a legal tradition revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is unique in its construction, implementation, how it permeates the society, how it becomes harmonious with the society. And those who preserve it, their methodology in understanding this law and implementing this law in the society is also unique. And destroying this uniqueness and plurality in Islamic legal tradition, the Sharia, is the core, or at the very core foundation of this Western modernization project. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us understanding. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help us and give us tawfiq of studying our own tradition in the manner it was revealed by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and protected and preserved by the great minds of the past. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us tawfiq of implementing this Sharia in our lives, in our societies, standing for it. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant nusrah to those who are standing and supporting the cause of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam and keep us from them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to destroy those who aim to destroy the cause of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and they cannot destroy it ever. And may Allah keep us, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from them. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by His beautiful names and exalted attributes to cure our sick, accept our martyrs, grant nusrah to the ummah, and elevate the ranks of all our dead. Ameen ya Rabbal Alameen. Wa sallallahu ta'ala ala nabi al-ummi. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.